Well, this is a really packed programme, so I've given myself the entirety of 10 minutes to talk about building stone. The people who were lucky enough to come to the workshop this morning or in January might be able to follow this better as well, because they have the advantage of looking at actual pieces of stone. So what's important is just what this is about, is the importance of materials in characterising both buildings like this and places. So, you know, you can imagine that if we were on the west of England, we would be looking at a whole bunch of red buildings built out of the sandstones of that part of the country. But because we're here, we're looking at limestones, and in particular, of course, we've already seen both at Priory House and in the pictures of the quarries that it's all about Tottenham and more Tottenham, and also white chalk, as we've seen in Priory House. And that's the story of course, it's a story of two halves, both medieval from when these buildings were built, and later with all the many phases of restoration and conservation. But it is more complex than we thought at first. And as we looked, we found more and more questions and answers. And so we'll look at the medieval story and then the story of restoration. So, something's gone wrong. Shall I try again? That's better. At the January workshop we did on building stone, we were lucky enough that Tony Woodhouse came and joined us. And he brought along his lovely double base from the cloisters that came out of the very shallow excavations in about 2004. And it's now on display in Priory House upstairs if you want to go and have a look at it. And it's on the right-hand side of this picture. Is that the right one? Yes, there. That was taken behind glass. But it's quite clearly, even through the glass, it's quite clearly an Oolitic stone, quite well sorted. And then when I came back and looked more closely at various bits and pieces around the building, I discovered another Oolitic stone, very, very shelly this time, which was actually in the buttresses of the North Aisle. And that's a close-up of it there, and it's sort of in here. And because the North Aisle was restored very heavily in the Victorian period, but not completely rebuilt, unlike the south side, I think they had a lot more to retain and a lot more to go on. So again, I think this is probably a medieval stone, and it's very surprising, I feel, given that the quarries of Tottenham are only 3 miles away. And given the very large number of different Jurassic Oolitic building stones that run all the way from the Combe Down in Somerset right away into Yorkshire, and without an immediately obvious quarry source, it can be really difficult to identify where these two stone types came from, especially as I can't really go around with a hammer knocking bits off to look at them more closely and cleanly. But there are clues, perhaps, in a study of St Albans Abbey by Tim Tatton-Brown, some of you will know, where similar stone types have been found. And so Tatton-Brown suggests as possibilities the Corallian beds to the east of Oxford, or possibly from the Blisworth limestone in Northamptonshire, and they're about 30 and 25 miles away each. And St Albans, I think, perhaps also gives us a clue to why they even bothered, given the quarry sources are much, much closer, and they owned the quarry. So in the 14th and 15th centuries, for instance, there are examples at St Albans, some visible and some documented, of stones other than tonneau being used for particular purposes, especially for base courses, for plinths and for parapets, i.e. they'd already realised that Tottenham was not always a good choice. It does not fare well externally, and that's often led to wholesale replacement. And so that brings us nicely to the second story of building stone, which is the one of restoration and conservation, and also how stone choice affects the aesthetic character of the buildings and the place, as well as the chances of longevity. So I'll take this roughly chronologically. So Some of the earliest choices of stone were not necessarily the best. And when you go outside, if you look closely at the west front, I think what we've got here, this isn't decayed Tottenham, but it is in fact a really, really sandy stone. And you can see the stripes in it, which are rather different from the sort of massive character of the chalk. And I suspect that this is the documented repair in around 1823. It's rather intriguing, and it's honestly its only similarity to Tottenham is that it's fairly fine-grained. It's rather mustardy in character. You can see the bedding planes, but it's fared very strangely. You know, some of the blocks are quite intact, and some of them have just completely gone. You know, and why on earth choose this? Well, I think there are some clues actually in one of the cathedral churches I look after, which is at Southwark, which is in this picture here. It's just a tiny bit. And you can see actually a very similar sort of sandstone being used. And you can see the cracks in it here, but here it's survived rather better. And in the 1820s and the 1830s, like many London buildings, I should say, the exterior stone is completely gone, complete rubbish, but stone, you know, it's Reigate stone and it's Caen stone, and they're lovely enough in themselves, but they really don't stand up to pollution or indeed lots of rain. It did need completely refacing on the exterior, and so the church was saved in the 1820s and 30s by the architect George Gwilt. And at this time, transport was improving, both with the canals and the quality of the roads, and stone was coming from all over the place. There was an enormous choice. And it's quite, after some investigation, we were quite clear that he'd chosen a West Yorkshire sandstone. He thought it was going to be as strong as the grit stone known as Bramley Fall. He was wrong. It was started off quite lovely, but in its own way, even though it's less than 200 years old, it's been replaced again and again and again, all by itself. And in fact, I'll come back to that later. The Victorians, by contrast, used a perfectly matching stone. They used Tonho, which of course matches. And they've used it for the whole of the South Aisle, which looks lovely and Romanesque, but is a complete rebuilding. And the last illustrations, which Hugh Garrett kindly sent to me earlier this week, show it looking not like that at all. And it was also used for the major restoration of the North Aisle. But the South Aisle, which is lovely and is weathered to give this golden carapace, which is actually a little bit different from the medieval greyer stone, it itself has required repairs recently, but we'll look at those in a moment. So I'm not certain. I think the Victorians are probably responsible for that tracery, but if anyone could tell me otherwise, let me know, because otherwise it's much newer. Because although they were using Tottenham for the walling stone, the tracery itself is clearly a Jurassic-Oolitic limestone, very stripy. It looks a bit like Weldon, though it could be something else. So back to the West Front, moving forwards in time. I think this is Bodley's work on the third layer of the wall arcade. It's clearly, we know he worked here and did restoration of the West Front, sort of 1901 to 03. And we know that this is replaced because a lovely early photograph in the Historic England collection shows many of these cusps missing. And now we have this wonderful set of foliated cusps with their balls on and lovely stiff leaf capitals, all incredibly crisp. And after 120 years, I can't quite believe that that's Tottenham. My best guess, and obviously I'm just guessing because I've just looked at it from the ground, is it matches really, really well, of course, is that it might be Chilmark from near Salisbury. Because this was already in use as a match for Tottenham by George Gilbert Scott at St Albans 50 years previously. So its use by his pupil, Bodley, would not perhaps be a surprise, though we need to make a formal identification. Caen is another possibility. And we think Caen stone was actually used for the southwest transept, which I looked at just before this talk with the geologist. Sorry, the southwest buttress, so just below here. And so Caen stone as well. There might have been a small amount of Caen in the medieval buildings. It was widely used across southeast England in the Middle Ages. There's a piece in Priory House. There may be some in the tower here. And it's certainly documented for conservation of the clerestory windows around 1980. And again, I haven't sort of flown up to look at them, but the stone here looks very uniform, like Caen wood, very different from the surrounding Tottenham. But we will find out perhaps later. And in the tower, you can see it, the sort of creamy stones that have been used in the parapet. And Caen is a lovely fine-grained sort of pale cream to creamy yellow. And like Chilmark, it's a good petrological and visual match for Tottenham, which perhaps buildings like this will have to, the owners of buildings like this may have to consider, because Tottenham is lovely, but you know, if you're thinking something lasts more than 100 years, you might want to invest in something else. Lastly, I want to show you Weldon. So these, you can see the stripes in the windows here, so for the presumably Victorian tracery. And it's, and that's a close-up, no, I take it back. This is a modern repair to the pilaster buttresses in the South Aisle. That's definitely Weldon, we know that's Weldon. I'm guessing that is. This is a close-up showing the lovely Oolitic structure of this piece of stone. And it is, I might say, a truly dreadful match for the Tottenham. And if there's ever an opportunity to swap that, I think that would be wonderful. Not partly to keep the lovely character of this medieval building, or rebuilt medieval building in the case of the South Aisle, and also because if you put together stones that are very different characters, they can have surprising adverse effects on one another. And I'm sure I've used up more than my 10 minutes, so thank you.